My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 45 years old, and 7 years ago, I retired as a Marine Corps major after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. When I returned home to civilian life, my parents acted like my military career was just a phase I needed to outgrow. Now I run a successful security consulting firm in Austin that specializes in training corporate executives in crisis management. I never expected to set foot in my hometown of Oak Ridge again, but last month, my world turned upside down when I discovered my parents had secretly transferred my promised inheritance, my grandfather's lakeside cabin, to my younger brother, while I was deployed overseas. I always knew I was different from the rest of my family. While they were content with their quiet lives in our small Midwestern town, I dreamed of something more. My father worked at the local factory for 30 years, my mother taught elementary school, and my brother followed my dad's footsteps at the plant. They never understood why I enlisted, why I would choose combat zones over comfort. Such a waste of potential, my mother would say during our increasingly rare phone calls. You could have been a doctor like your cousin Jennifer. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in September when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I was in the middle of finalizing a security protocol for a tech company expanding into Southeast Asia, and I nearly let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Rebecca? The voice sounded familiar, yet distant. It's Angela Watson from high school. I don't know if you remember me. I remembered Angela. She lived 3 houses down from my parents and ran the local real estate office now. We weren't close, but our mothers were in the same garden club. Of course, I said, wondering why she'd be calling after all these years. What can I help you with? There was a pause, uncomfortable enough that I knew what was coming wouldn't be good news. I'm calling about your grandfather's property on Lake Willow, she said finally. I'm handling the listing, and I wanted to, well, I thought you should know it's going on the market next week. My grandfather's cabin, the place where I'd spent every summer until I left for the Marines. The property my grandfather had specifically mentioned in his will would come to me, his only granddaughter who shared his love for fishing at dawn when the lake was still cloaked in mist. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice steady from years of training to remain calm in crisis. That property was left to me in my grandfather's will. That's why I'm calling, Angela said, her voice dropping. Your brother Jason came into my office yesterday with the deed transferred to his name. Your parents were with him. They mentioned you'd agreed to the arrangement years ago, given that you're settled elsewhere. The words hit me like shrapnel. I hadn't agreed to anything. The cabin was the only place I'd felt truly at peace, even before my deployments. It was where I planned to eventually retire, to hear the loons calling across the water and watch the sunrise over the pines. It was my sanctuary, promised to me long before I ever put on a uniform. I appreciate the call, Angela, I said, professional to the end. I'll look into this. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, staring out at the Austin skyline. The gleaming towers seemed suddenly distant as memories of the cabin flooded back. The wooden dock where Grandpa taught me to clean fish. The stone fireplace where we'd warm ourselves after early morning fishing trips. The way he'd look at me with pride when I'd mastered a new knot or handled the boat in rough water. You've got good instincts, Becca, he'd say. You see things others don't. Those words had given me strength through basic training, through officer candidate school, through firefights in distant mountains. And now, the one piece of him I had left was being taken away without my knowledge. I canceled my afternoon meetings and booked a flight to Chicago for the next morning. 7 years since I'd been back, and it took betrayal to finally pull me home. The rental car felt uncomfortably small as I drove the familiar route from O'Hare to Oak Ridge. 3 hours of flat farmland and small towns that seemed frozen in time. It was early October, and the fields were golden with harvest, so different from the urban landscape I'd grown accustomed to. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I passed the Welcome to Oak Ridge sign, population 8,542. a number that hadn't changed since I was in high school. My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered. The blue paint was fading, and the maple tree in the front yard had grown massive, casting the entire property in shadow. I parked across the street, gathering myself before approaching. What would I even say? "How could you?" seemed inadequate for the magnitude of their betrayal. As I stepped onto the familiar cracked sidewalk, memories surged unbidden. Running through sprinklers on hot summer days. My father teaching me to ride a bike on this very street. The morning I left for boot camp, my duffel bag over my shoulder, my mother crying not from pride but from what she called throwing your life away. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that sounded like gunfire in the quiet neighborhood. My mother answered, her face registering shock before quickly composing itself into a tight smile. She'd aged, her once dark hair now silver, new lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of years past. "Rebecca," she said, as if I'd just been gone for the weekend instead of 7 years. "What a surprise." "Is Dad home?" I asked, not bothering, with pleasantries. "I need to speak with both of you." She hesitated, then stepped back, allowing me into the house that smelled exactly as I remembered. Cinnamon and furniture polish. The scent of a home perpetually prepared for company that rarely came. Dad was in his recliner, the same one he'd had since I was a child, watching a baseball game. He looked up, his expression guarded. "Rebecca," he said, his voice careful. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, standing my ground in the center of the living room. "I just heard from Angela Watson that you're selling Grandpa's cabin, the cabin that was left to me in his will." My mother bustled nervously around the room, straightening magazines that were already perfectly aligned on the coffee table. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I didn't come for coffee," I said. "I came for an explanation." Dad muted the television, setting down the remote with deliberate slowness. "You've been gone a long time, Rebecca. Things change. Ownership documented in a legal will doesn't just change," I countered, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "That cabin was left to me, and you both know it. Your brother needed it more," Mom interjected, finally standing still. "Jason has 3 children, a family. You're single, living halfway across the country. What would you even do with a cabin in Oak Ridge?" The absurdity of her question nearly made me laugh. "It's not about what I'd do with it, it's mine. Grandpa wanted me to have it." "Your grandfather didn't expect you to abandon your family and move to Texas," Dad said, his voice hardening. "He thought you'd stay local, maybe marry that Williamson boy who was always sweet on you." I felt my military training kick in, the compartmentalization, the ability to focus through chaos and emotion. "When exactly did you transfer the property? To Jason?" They exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that comes from decades of marriage. 4 years ago, Dad finally admitted, "while you were on your last deployment." The betrayal crystallized, sharp and clear. While I was in a war zone, they were rewriting my future without my knowledge or consent. "Where's the paperwork?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I want to see exactly what you signed." Mom disappeared into the study, returning with a manila folder. "It was all legal," she said defensively. "We spoke with Attorney Stevens. Since the cabin was never officially transferred to your name after your grandfather passed, we had the right to reallocate it." I opened the folder, scanning the documents. There it was, in black and white. My parents, acting as executors of my grandfather's estate, had transferred the deed to Jason, citing family circumstances as justification. "Does Jason know?" I asked, looking up. "Does he know you went against Grandpa's explicit wishes?" Something flashed across my mother's face. Guilt, perhaps, or simply discomfort at being confronted. "Jason has a family to provide for," she repeated, as if that justified everything. He needed the security more than you do. You have your career. She said the word like it was something distasteful, something less than the life my brother had chosen. I slid the documents back into the folder. I'll be taking these, I said. Those are our copies, Dad protested. You'll get them back after my lawyer reviews them, I replied, tucking the folder under my arm. When is Jason coming to town? I'd like to speak with him before I leave. He lives here now, Mom said quickly. In the Hendersons' old place on Maple Street. But Rebecca, please don't make this difficult. He's counting on the money from selling the cabin to renovate their house. They're expecting another baby in December. Of course they were. Perfect Jason with his perfect traditional life. Everything our parents had wanted for both of us. While I was earning combat medals and building a business from scratch, he was fulfilling their small-town American dream. I'll reach out to him directly, I said, turning toward the door. Don't call to. Warn him. Mom reached for my arm. Rebecca, please. We're family. Can't we discuss this reasonably? I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then back to her face. Family doesn't go behind each other's backs. Family respects wishes of the deceased. Family doesn't wait until someone is in active combat to steal their inheritance. The words landed hard. Dad stood up, his face flushing. Now wait just a minute. We didn't steal anything. We made a practical decision for the good of the family. If you'd stayed in touch, if you'd been present. If I'd been present? I cut him off. I was serving my country. I was leading missions that kept people like you safe in your comfortable homes. I'm sorry that was such an inconvenience to your family planning. I walked out before either of them could respond, the screen door banging shut behind me with a finality that felt appropriate. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, focusing on my breathing the way I'd been trained. In, hold, out. Repeat until the ringing in your ears subsides. Instead of driving to Jason's, I headed toward Lake Willow. I needed to see the cabin one more time before it became a battlefield. Legal this time rather than literal. The drive to the lake was exactly as I remembered. 20 minutes outside town, the road winding through pine forests before opening up to the glittering expanse of water. The cabin sat on the north shore, set back from the road, only the weathered mailbox with Mitchell painted on it marking the gravel driveway. My grandfather's name, my mother's maiden name, not Martinez. I parked and walked down the familiar path, the scent of pine needles and lake water bringing back a flood of memories. The cabin looked smaller than in my recollections. Its dark green paint faded to a soft sage. The front porch sagged slightly on one end, and the windows needed washing, but it was still the most beautiful place I'd ever known. I rounded the corner to the lakeside deck and stopped short. A man was sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs, looking out over the water. For a moment, I thought it was a stranger, until he turned. Becca? Jason stood, clearly surprised. What are you doing here? My younger brother had changed in the years since I'd seen him last. His hairline had receded, and he'd gained weight around the middle. He looked tired, with dark circles under eyes that were so similar to my own. I could ask you the same question, I replied, considering this property isn't yours to enter. Confusion crossed his face. What are you talking about? Mom and Dad signed the cabin over to me years ago. It's mine. Well, at least until the sale closes next week. Did they tell you about Grandpa's will? I asked, stepping onto the deck. About his specific request that this place come to me? Jason's expression shifted, discomfort replacing confusion. They mentioned something about him having outdated ideas, but said you'd agreed it made more sense for the property to stay with someone local. I never agreed to anything, I said quietly. They made that decision while I was deployed in Afghanistan, without asking me, without telling me. He sank back into the chair, running a hand over his thinning hair. Damn it. I knew something. Wasn't right. Dad was too insistent about getting the paperwork done quickly. I leaned against the railing, studying my brother's face. We'd been close once, before different choices pulled us in different directions. Before our parents' obvious favoritism created a rift neither of us knew how to bridge. "Why are you selling it?" I asked. "This place has been in Mom's family for generations." Jason sighed, looking out at the water. "We need the money. The factory's been cutting hours, and with the new baby coming. Melissa's had complications. She can't work right now. The medical bills are piling up." I studied my brother's face, searching for signs of deception. Jason had always been terrible at lying. His left eye would twitch slightly, a tell I'd discovered when we were kids. There was no twitch now, just exhaustion and worry etched into the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry about Melissa and the baby," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "But this place was supposed to be mine, Jason. It's the only thing of Grandpa's I wanted." He nodded slowly. "I remember how close you two were. He used to brag about you constantly after you enlisted, you know. Carried your picture in his wallet." That revelation hit me hard. My parents had always acted as if my military service was something shameful, a deviation from the proper path. I'd assumed my grandfather felt the same way in his final years. "Dad never told me that," I said quietly. "Of course he didn't," Jason replied with a bitter laugh. "It didn't fit the narrative." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds the gentle lapping of water against the shore and distant calls of geese heading south. "What are you going to do?" Jason finally asked. I turned to look at the cabin, its familiar silhouette against the darkening sky. "I'm going to fight for what's rightfully mine. But Jason, I'm not fighting you. This is between me and Mom and Dad." He nodded, standing up with a weary sigh. "For what it's worth, if I'd known the truth, I never would have accepted the property. Despite what you might think, I'm not the golden child who gets everything." That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You left," he said simply. "You got to build your own life, make your own choices. I stayed, did exactly what was expected, and all I got was the weight of their expectations and disappointments." He pulled his jacket tighter around himself. "Maybe we both lost, just in different ways." I watched my brother walk to his truck, shoulders slumped under burdens I hadn't bothered to consider. I'd been so certain he was the favored one, the son, who could do no wrong while I was the perpetual disappointment. But perhaps the reality was more complicated. That night, I checked into the only motel in Oak Ridge, a dated place with wood paneling and a bedspread that had probably been there since the 90s. I spread the documents from my parents' house across the small desk and called Marcus Abernathy, my attorney in Austin. "They did this while you were deployed?" Marcus's voice carried clear indignation through the phone. "That's not just morally questionable, it could be legally actionable." "What do you mean?" I asked, flipping through the transfer papers. Military members have certain protections under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. If they executed this transfer without proper notification while you were on active duty, especially in a combat zone, we might have grounds to challenge the entire transaction. Hope flickered, though I tried to temper it. "What do you need from me?" "Forward me everything you have. I'll need your deployment dates, copies of your grandfather's will, and any communications you had with your parents about the property. I'll also need to find a local attorney in Illinois to collaborate with." I promised to send everything and hung up, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined reconnecting with my family after years away. The next morning, I drove to the county records office, a small brick building downtown that seemed frozen in time. The receptionist, a gray-haired woman with cat-eye glasses, recognized me immediately. "Rebecca Mitchell!" "My goodness, it's been years. You were just a skinny thing in a uniform last time I saw you." She beamed. "Marjorie Peterson. We met at your grandfather's funeral." I forced a smile, vaguely recalling her among the sea of faces at the service I'd flown home for 7 years ago. "Mrs. Peterson, lovely to see you again. I'm hoping you can help me with some property records." Her smile dimmed slightly. This wouldn't be about the Mitchell cabin, would it? I processed that transfer myself a few years back. Such a beautiful property. That's exactly what I'm looking into, I confirmed. I'd like to see all records related to the property since my grandfather's death, including the original will filed with the county. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Of course, dear. Give me a few minutes to pull those files. While waiting, I gazed around the office with its ancient filing cabinets and single ancient computer. Oak Ridge existed in a strange time warp, resistant to change in ways both charming and frustrating. It was why I'd felt so suffocated growing up here, yet also why the cabin held such appeal. A place where tradition and permanence still meant something. Mrs. Peterson returned with a thick folder. Here's everything we have on file, including the property's history going back to 1952, when your great-grandfather first purchased it. I thanked her and settled at a small table in the corner to examine the documents. My grandfather's will was exactly as I remembered, clear and specific about the cabin being left to me, with a personal note attached explaining his reasons. I traced his handwriting with my finger, feeling a renewed surge of determination. What surprised me was the original deed from 1952. The property hadn't been purchased solely by my great-grandfather as family lore suggested. His wife, my great-grandmother Eleanor Mitchell, was listed as an equal owner, and there was an unusual clause in the deed about matrilineal succession. I made copies of everything, particularly that original deed with its curious language. That afternoon, I drove to Jason's house, a modest two-story on a quiet street lined with maple trees dropping their colorful leaves onto neatly kept lawns. His wife, Melissa, answered the door, her pregnant belly prominent under a stretched sweater. Rebecca? Her surprise was evident. Jason mentioned you were in town. Please come in. The house was chaotic in the way homes with small children inevitably are. Toys scattered across the living room floor, fingerprints on the furniture, the background noise of cartoons playing in another room. It was warm and lived in, so different from my minimalist Austin condo. Melissa lowered herself carefully onto the couch, gesturing for me to join her. Jason's at work, but he should be home soon. Can I get you something to drink? I'm fine, thank you, I said, noticing how pale she looked. Jason mentioned you've been having a difficult pregnancy. She nodded, unconsciously resting a hand on her stomach. Placenta previa. I'm supposed to be on bed rest, but with 2 active kids, that's easier said than done. I felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anyone helping you? Your parents come by when they can, but your mom still teaches, and your dad's picking up extra shifts at the factory since Jason's hours were cut. She smiled wearily. We're managing. The front door opened before I could respond, and Jason walked in, still wearing his factory uniform with Martinez embroidered over the pocket. He stopped short when he saw me. Becca, I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to talk to both of you, I said. About the cabin and some things I discovered today. Jason's expression tightened, but he nodded, taking a seat beside his wife. I explained what I'd found at the county records office, particularly the original deed with its unusual clause. What does matrilineal succession mean exactly? Melissa asked, leaning forward with interest. It means the property was intended to pass through the female line, I explained. My great-grandmother apparently insisted on it when they purchased the land. The cabin was built later, but the land itself was meant to stay with the women in the family. Jason frowned. But Dad said Grandpa left everything to be divided between his children, Mom and Uncle Robert. That's what they told you, I agreed. But the will I saw today specifically leaves the cabin to me, as the eldest granddaughter. And given this clause in the original deed, I'm not sure Mom even had the legal right to transfer it to anyone else. So what does this mean? Melissa asked, one hand protectively over her belly. We've already accepted an offer on the property. We need that money, Rebecca. I looked at my sister-in-law, at the genuine worry in her eyes, at my brother, with new gray at his temples and calloused hands from years of physical labor. They weren't villains in this story. They were just trying to get by, using the resources they thought were legitimately theirs. I don't want to hurt your family, I said carefully. But I also can't let Mom and Dad get away with what they did. That cabin is my inheritance, not just financially but emotionally. It's my connection to Grandpa. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent me back decades to when we were kids, and he was trying to figure out a difficult homework problem. What if we found another way? He suggested. The factory's struggling, but I've been offered a management position at the new manufacturing plant in Cedar Rapids. It would mean relocating, but the salary's better, the hours more stable. You haven't mentioned this before, Melissa said, surprise evident in her voice. Jason shrugged. I didn't want to consider moving while you're in this condition. And honestly, leaving Oak Ridge feels like failing somehow, like I'm not living up to what's expected of me. I understood that feeling all too well. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint people who have the wrong expectations, I said quietly. We talked for another hour, brainstorming possibilities. By the time I left, we had the outline of a plan, one that would require confronting our parents with some uncomfortable truths, but might allow all of us to move forward with integrity. The next day, I met with a local attorney recommended by Marcus, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Choi who specialized in estate law. She reviewed the documents I'd collected with meticulous attention. This is fascinating, she said, tapping the original deed. The matrilineal succession clause is unusual but entirely enforceable. Given this and your grandfather's explicit wishes in his will, combined with the timing of the transfer during your active deployment, I believe we have a very strong case to invalidate your parents' actions. What would that mean exactly? I asked. The property would revert to you as the rightful heir. Any pending sale would be void. She looked up from the papers. But litigation can be lengthy and expensive. Have you considered approaching your parents with this information first? They might be willing to correct the situation voluntarily once they understand their legal position. I thought about my parents' stubbornness, their unwavering belief in their own correctness. They won't back down easily, but it's worth trying before we file anything formal. Diana nodded. I can draft a letter outlining our findings and the potential legal consequences. Sometimes official letterhead makes people take matters more seriously. The next day, I requested that my parents meet me at Diana's office in the small professional building on Main Street. I deliberately chose neutral territory, someplace where the power dynamics couldn't default to their home field advantage. Jason had offered to come for moral support, but I declined. This confrontation needed to happen, without him caught in the middle. I arrived 15 minutes early, reviewing our strategy with Diana one final time. She had prepared a comprehensive folder of documents, including copies of the original deed, my grandfather's will, and relevant statutes from the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Her office felt like command headquarters before a mission. Organized, focused, ready. My parents arrived exactly on time. My father's face set in the stubborn expression I knew all too well, my mother looking anxious but determined. They sat stiffly in the chairs across from Diana's desk, glancing at me with a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. Thank you for coming, Diana began, professional and courteous. I'm Diana Choi, an attorney representing your daughter, Rebecca. I've asked you here today to discuss the Mitchell family property on Lake Willow. We've already explained the situation to Rebecca, my father interrupted. The property belongs to Jason now. It's a family decision that's been settled for years. Diana smiled politely, unfazed. I understand that's your position, Mr. Martinez. However, I've been reviewing some documents that suggest the transfer may not have been valid. She slid the copy of the original deed across her desk. Are you familiar with this document? My father barely glanced at it. Of course, it's the property deed. Have you ever read it carefully? Particularly the clause regarding ownership succession? My mother leaned forward now, peering at the paper with a frown. What clause? William's father left that property to him, and William left it to be managed by us as executors of his estate. Actually, Diana said, highlighting a section with her finger. This original deed from 1952 contains a matrilineal succession clause, stipulating that the property must pass through the female line of the family. Furthermore, Mr. William Mitchell's will specifically names Rebecca as the intended heir to this particular property. My mother's face paled slightly, but my father scoffed. That's ridiculous. Eleanor wouldn't have insisted on something like that. And even if she did, it's an outdated concept that doesn't apply in modern times. Actually, Mr. Martinez, such clauses remain legally binding unless formally challenged and overturned in court. They're not invalidated simply by the passage of time, Diana explained patiently. Additionally, I should point out that the transfer of the property to your son occurred while Rebecca was actively deployed in a combat zone, which potentially violates the Service Members' Civil Relief Act. What does her military service have to do with a family property decision? My father demanded, his voice rising. Diana remained calm, her tone precise and professional. The SCRA provides certain legal protections to active duty military personnel, including protection against adverse legal actions and property transfers without proper notification and consent. The timing of your actions could be interpreted as taking advantage of Rebecca's inability to challenge the transfer while she was serving her country overseas. The word overseas seemed to hang in the air. I'd never been just overseas, I'd been in active combat zones, leading missions where life and death hung in precarious balance. My parents had always minimized my service, speaking of it in vague terms that stripped away its reality and significance. We had no idea about any of this, my mother said, looking genuinely distressed. The family lawyer assured us everything was in order. Did you specifically ask him about the matrilineal clause or the SCRA protections? Diana asked. Their silence was answer enough. Here's where we stand, Diana continued. My client has legitimate legal grounds to challenge the property transfer and any pending sale. Given the strength of her case, a court would likely rule in her favor, returning ownership to her as the rightful heir under both her grandfather's will and the original deed restrictions. My father's jaw tightened. So you're threatening us with a lawsuit? After all we've done for you? I remained silent, letting Diana handle the legal aspects while gathering my thoughts for the personal conversation that would inevitably follow. This isn't a threat, Mr. Martinez, Diana replied smoothly. It's a statement of legal reality. However, Rebecca has authorized me to present an alternative proposition that might resolve this matter without litigation. Now my mother looked directly at me, her eyes pleading. What kind of proposition? I nodded to Diana, who slid a document across the desk. Rebecca is willing to allow the current sale to proceed, on the condition that the proceeds are divided as follows: 50% to establish a medical trust for Jason's family to cover his wife's pregnancy complications and provide a safety net for their children, and 50% to Rebecca as partial compensation for her rightful inheritance. My parents stared at the document, then at each other, clearly stunned by this unexpected offer. Why would you do this? My father finally asked, turning to me with genuine confusion in his eyes. You could take it all. For the first time since the meeting began, I spoke. Because despite everything, Jason is still my brother. His children are still my nieces and nephew. And while you and Mom may have forgotten what family loyalty means, I haven't. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped. That's not fair, Rebecca. We've always done what we thought was best for the family. For Jason's family, I corrected. Not for mine. You don't have a family, my father said dismissively. You have a career. The words stung, but not as deeply as they once would have. I have a life I built myself, after you made it clear that who I am and what I wanted didn't fit your vision. I have colleagues who respect me, friends who support me, and a career that makes a difference in the world. Diana tactfully gathered her papers, sensing the conversation had moved beyond legal matters. I'll give you some privacy to discuss this. The offer will remain open for 48 hours, after which we'll need to proceed with legal action to protect Rebecca's interests. She slipped out, closing the door behind her. In the sudden silence, my parents seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than the giants who had once controlled my world. You never even asked me, I said quietly. About the cabin, about my life, about anything that mattered to me. You just decided I didn't need my inheritance because I didn't live the life you wanted for me. We thought you'd forgotten about the cabin, my mother said weakly. You never mentioned it after you left. I never mentioned it because it hurt. Too much, I admitted. That cabin was the one place where I felt completely accepted, where Grandpa saw me for who I really was and valued me anyway. It was supposed to be my eventual home, the place I'd return to when my service was done. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We didn't know it meant that much to you. You never asked, I repeated. Just like you never asked about my deployments, my promotions, the medals I earned, or the company I built after retirement. You were so busy being disappointed in the daughter who left that you never bothered to know the woman I became. Mother's eyes filled with tears. We were scared for you, Rebecca. Every time we saw news about casualties in Afghanistan, we'd be terrified it was you. It was easier to pretend you were just away, not in danger. So you pushed me away emotionally because you were scared? I asked, genuinely trying to understand. And then punished me by taking away my inheritance because I wasn't here? My father looked down at his hands, weathered from decades of factory work. We didn't see it as punishment, we saw it as practical. Jason was here, raising a family in Oak Ridge. The cabin could help them in tangible ways. And I couldn't possibly need anything because I was successful on my own, I concluded. Did it ever occur to you that success doesn't erase the need for family connections? For roots? For the things that remind us where we came from? The silence that followed held decades of misunderstandings and unspoken words. What would you have done with the cabin? My mother finally asked, her voice small. If we had respected your grandfather's wishes. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to share the dream I'd carried for years. I planned to renovate it, modernize the systems while keeping its character. I'd use it during leaves from active duty, and eventually retire there. Build a dock where I could fish like Grandpa. Taught me, maybe start a small veterans retreat program, a place where other service members could find the peace I always found there. My parents exchanged glances, something unreadable passing between them. You really had it all figured out, my father said, surprise evident in his voice. Of course I did. Planning and strategy are literally what I do, both in the military and in my business. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Just because I don't share my plans with people who don't bother to ask doesn't mean I don't have them. My mother reached across the table, tentatively touching my hand. I nearly pulled away, the gesture so unexpected after years without physical contact between us. We've made a terrible mistake, she said softly. Several of them over many years. My father nodded slowly, the admission clearly difficult for him. What if we accept your proposal about the sale proceeds, but also try to find a way to make things right beyond that? I studied his face, looking for the manipulation or empty promises I'd grown to expect. Instead, I saw something unexpected, genuine, regret, and perhaps a glimmer of respect that had never been there before. That would depend on what making things right means to you, I said carefully. My mother squeezed my hand. It means getting to know the woman our daughter became, if she'll give us that chance. I didn't answer immediately, weighing their words against years of disappointment and disconnect. I can't promise anything, I finally said. But I'm willing to have a conversation, a real one, where you actually listen to who I am instead of lamenting who I'm not. They both nodded, and in that small gesture, I saw the first crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. As we left Diana's office, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. There's one more thing you should know about the pending sale. I tensed, bracing for another complication. What about it? The buyers, he said, looking strangely uncomfortable. It's a development company. They're planning to tear down the cabin and build 3 vacation homes on the property. The news hit me like a physical blow. Not just losing my inheritance, but watching the cabin itself be destroyed, erased as if it had never existed. The thought of bulldozers tearing through Grandpa's careful craftsmanship, of concrete foundations pouring over the ground where generations of my family had gathered, it was almost too much to bear. When is the sale closing? I asked, my voice tight. Next Wednesday, my mother answered. They've already paid an earnest money deposit. 1 week. 1 week until the cabin would be irretrievably lost. The timeline suddenly made the legal solution seem woefully inadequate, regardless of how the proceeds were divided. I need to think, I said, stepping away from them. I'll be in touch about the agreement. That evening, I sat alone in my motel room, the walls closing in as I tried to process everything. The cabin wasn't just property to be divided or money to be allocated. It was a physical connection to my grandfather, to the only family member who had truly seen and accepted me. And now it would be demolished, its memories bulldozed to make way for generic vacation homes for wealthy weekenders who would never understand its significance. I called Marcus in Austin, updating him on the meeting with my parents and the new revelation about the developer's plans. Is there any way to stop the sale completely? I asked. Not just get a portion of the proceeds, but actually prevent the cabin from being destroyed. Marcus was silent for a moment, thinking. Potentially. If we file for an emergency injunction based on the matrilineal clause and your SCRA protections, we could halt the sale temporarily. But to permanently invalidate the transfer to your brother and restore your ownership, we'd need a full court hearing. That would take time, possibly months. The sale closes next Wednesday, I reminded him. We don't have months. Let me consult with Diana and see if there's a faster solution under Illinois law, Marcus promised. In the meantime, have you considered simply making a counter-offer to the developers? If they just want lakefront property for vacation homes, there might be other parcels that would serve their purpose equally well. It was a pragmatic suggestion, and one I hadn't considered. I'll look into it, I said. Thanks, Marcus. After hanging up, I pulled out my laptop and began researching the development company. Northern Lakes Luxury Properties was based in Chicago, specializing in high-end vacation homes throughout the Midwest. Their website showcased gleaming modern structures with wall-to-wall windows and minimalist designs, as far from my grandfather's rustic, hand-built cabin as could be imagined. The company's owner and CEO was listed as Alexander Whitman, with a corporate headshot showing a silver-haired man in his 60s with cold eyes and a practiced smile. Something about the name triggered a distant memory, but I couldn't place it. On impulse, I called Jason. Northern Lakes Luxury Properties, I said when he answered. Does that name mean anything to you? Jason was quiet for a moment. Not specifically. Why? They're the developers buying the cabin. I'm trying to figure out if there's any way to stop the sale completely, not just split the proceeds. Becca, he said, his voice gentle, I know how much the cabin means to you, but we've already signed the sales agreement. There are penalties if we back out. What if I covered those penalties? I asked. What if I could find the developers another suitable property nearby? He sighed. It's not that simple. The buyers specifically wanted that location, something about the western exposure and the natural cove. Dad said they weren't interested in any other parcels on the lake. That struck me as odd. Lake Willow had numerous lots with similar features, many of them already cleared for construction, which would save the developers the cost of demolition. Why fixate on our family's specific property? Who handled the sale from your end? I asked. Dad's old friend Richard Whitman, Jason replied. He's a real estate broker in Chicago who specializes in vacation properties. Whitman. The same surname as the development company's CEO. That couldn't be coincidence. Jason, I think there's something weird about this sale. The development company is run by someone named Alexander Whitman. Any chance he's related to Richard? I don't know. Wait, actually, Dad did mention something about Richard's brother being his boss or partner or something. Jason paused. Why? What are you thinking? I'm not sure yet, I answered truthfully. But something doesn't add up. Can you send me the sales agreement? I want to look it over. He hesitated. I'd have to ask Dad. He's keeping all the paperwork. Then ask him, I said firmly. Tonight, if possible. After hanging up, I dug deeper into Northern Lake's luxury properties, searching public records and business registrations. The company had been founded 15 years ago and had developed over 20 properties throughout Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois. Nothing unusual there. Then I searched for information on Richard Whitman and found his real estate profile, highlighting his 30 years of experience in the luxury property market. His biography mentioned he had grown up in Illinois and attended Oak Ridge High School, graduating the same year as my father. I sat back, pieces starting to click into place. Richard wasn't just Dad's old friend in some vague professional sense. They had grown up together, gone to school together. There was a personal connection that my parents hadn't mentioned. My phone rang, Jason calling back. Dad was weird about it, he said without preamble. Got all defensive when I asked for a copy of the agreement. Wanted to know why you needed it. I had to remind him that technically I'm the current owner and have a right to review the paperwork. And? I prompted. He finally dug it out, but insisted on going through it with me. There's a clause I never noticed before. If we back out, the penalty isn't just losing the earnest money. We'd have to pay an additional $50,000 liquidated damages fee. That was unusually punitive for a residential real estate transaction. That's not normal, Jason. Someone wanted to make absolutely sure this deal went through. There's something else, he added, his voice lowering. When I asked Dad about Richard Whitman being related to the development company owner, he got really agitated. Said it was just a coincidence, that lots of people have the same last name. But you don't believe him? No, Jason admitted. I've never seen him react that way to a simple question. And then Mom came in and changed the subject, started talking about Melissa's baby shower like her life depended on it. I thanked Jason and promised to keep him updated. After hanging up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, thinking through the implications. If Richard Whitman and Alexander Whitman were indeed brothers, and Richard had some long-standing connection to my father, what did that mean for the cabin sale? Was there something about the property itself that made it uniquely valuable to the Whitmans? I needed more information, and there was only one person in town who might have it. The next morning, I drove to the small assisted living facility on Wye, the outskirts of Oak Ridge where my grandfather's younger sister, my great-aunt Esther, had lived for the past decade. At 92, she was the oldest living member of the Mitchell family, and she had grown up visiting the same cabin that was now at the center of this conflict. The facility was bright and well-maintained, with wide hallways and large windows overlooking carefully tended gardens. A receptionist directed me to Esther's apartment, explaining that my aunt was usually awake and alert in the mornings. I knocked gently on her door, unsure if she would even remember me after so many years. The door opened to reveal a tiny woman with cloud-white hair and piercing blue eyes that were startlingly familiar. They were my eyes, my grandfather's eyes, the Mitchell family trait that had somehow skipped my mother. "Rebecca," she said, recognition immediate in her voice. "William's granddaughter, the soldier." Yes, Aunt Esther, I replied, surprised and touched that she knew me, though I'm retired from active duty now. She beckoned me inside, her movements deliberate but graceful for her age. I've followed your career through Eleanor, my social media coordinator. She shows me all the family news online. Come, sit. You look like you're on a mission. Her apartment was small but elegant, filled with antiques and family photographs. I sat in an armchair across from her, noticing a recent picture of me in uniform displayed prominently on an end table. I am on a mission, in a way, I admitted. I'm trying to understand something about the family cabin on Lake Willow. Esther's eyes sharpened. William's place, the one he left to you. My surprise must have shown on my face because she smiled slightly. I may be old, Rebecca, but I still have all my faculties. My brother and I had no secrets. He told me he was leaving the cabin to you, his only granddaughter. The Mitchell women have always been the keepers of that land. Her phrasing caught my attention. The Mitchell women? Does that have something to do with the matrilineal succession clause in the original deed? She nodded, settling back in her chair. So you know about that. Good. Eleanor insisted on it when she and Thomas purchased the property. It was unusual for the time. 1952 wasn't exactly progressive about women's property rights, but Eleanor was formidable. My great-grandmother, I clarified. But why was it so important to her that the property passed through the female line? Esther's gaze turned distant, focused on memories from long ago. That land was special to Eleanor. Before it was developed, when it was just forest and lakefront, she used to go there with her mother and grandmother. They were part Native American, Potawatomi. That particular cove on Lake Willow was a traditional gathering place for women in their family for generations. When it came up for sale, Eleanor was determined to keep it in the female line, to honor that heritage. I sat stunned, processing this revelation. No one in my family had ever mentioned Native American ancestry, let alone a sacred connection to the land that now held our cabin. Does that cove have a particular name? I asked, a suspicion forming. The locals called it Whitman's Cove, Esther replied. Named after the family that owned most of the surrounding land in the late 1800s before it was parceled and sold. The Whitmans were major landholders in the county back then, with timber interests throughout the region. Whitman, the same name as the developers now trying to buy the property. The coincidence seemed increasingly implausible. Aunt Esther, what happened between the Whitman family and ours? Was there some kind of dispute? She raised an eyebrow. You've been doing your homework. Yes, there was bad blood. The story passed. Down was that Eleanor's grandmother had certain rights to use the cove area, rights supposedly granted by an early Whitman patriarch who had respected the native claims to the land. But when he died, his sons rejected any such arrangement and tried to force the native families out completely. And then generations later, Eleanor was able to buy part of that same land legally, I concluded. Exactly. It was her way of reclaiming what had been taken. That's why the matrilineal clause was so important to her. It wasn't just about women's rights. It was about maintaining that reclaimed connection to her maternal heritage. I leaned forward. Aunt Esther, do you know anything about Richard or Alexander Whitman? They would be roughly my parents' generation. She frowned in concentration. Richard Whitman. Yes, he was in school with your father. They had some kind of falling out in their senior year, something to do with your mother, I believe. As for Alexander, he would be Richard's older brother. He left Oak Ridge decades ago, made a fortune in real estate development in Chicago. The pieces were aligning, forming a picture I didn't like. One more question. Is there anything especially valuable about that particular plot of land, beyond its historical or sentimental significance? Esther studied me carefully. Why do you ask? Because a development company owned by Alexander Whitman is trying to buy our cabin, and they've specifically insisted on that exact location when there are other similar properties available around the lake. Her eyes widened slightly. Thomas always said there were mineral deposits under the hillside behind the cabin, nothing that could be profitably extracted in the 1950s, but he was convinced it would be valuable someday. Eleanor thought he was spinning tales, but he'd worked in geological survey before the war and seemed certain. Mineral deposits. In today's market, with modern extraction methods, certain minerals could be extremely valuable, particularly rare earth elements essential for electronics and renewable energy technology. I thanked Aunt Esther for her time and insights, promising to keep her updated on the situation with the cabin. As I was leaving, she caught my hand in her thin, papery one. "That land belongs to the Mitchell women, Rebecca. Your great-grandmother would be proud to see you fighting for it." She pressed something into my palm, a small, smooth stone on a leather cord. "Eleanor's talisman. She said it came from the cove. It's yours now." The stone was dark green with flecks of gold, polished by generations of handling. I slipped it around my neck, oddly comforted by its weight. "Thank you," I said, softly. "I won't let it go without a fight." Leaving the facility, I called Marcus immediately, excitement sharpening my voice as I explained everything I'd learned. "We need to find out if there's been any geological survey of that land recently," I told him. "And I need you to dig into the relationship between Richard Whitman, my father, and this development company. Something isn't right about this whole transaction." "I'm on it," Marcus promised. "In the meantime, Diana says we can file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning based on the SCRA violations alone. That should buy us at least a temporary halt to the sale." I drove directly to the county records office again, requesting any recent permits or surveys filed for the Lake Willow area, particularly involving geological assessment. Mrs. Peterson, the receptionist who had helped me before, raised her eyebrows at my request. "Funny you should ask," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "There was a private company doing test drilling along the western shore earlier this year. Very hush-hush, but my nephew works for the county environmental office and had to process their permits." "Do you remember the name of the company?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She thought for a moment. "Something with resource in it. Whitman Resource Exploration. That was it. Is that helpful?" It was more than helpful. It was confirmation. Alexander Whitman wasn't just buying our property for vacation homes. He was after whatever lay beneath it, something valuable enough to create fake vacation home plans and pressure my family into a quick sale with punitive contract terms. As I left the records office, my phone rang. It was Diana Choi. "Rebecca, I've been looking into the title history based on what you told me about the matrilineal clause," she said without preamble. "There's something strange in the chain of title. When your mother inherited her interest in the property from your grandfather, there should have been documentation acknowledging the succession restriction. I can't find any record that such acknowledgement was ever properly filed." "What does that mean legally?" I asked, hurrying to my car. "It means when your parents transferred the property to Jason, they may have done so without clear legal authority. The matrilineal clause should have automatically directed inheritance to you as the eldest female descendant, regardless of what your grandfather's will stated or what your parents attempted to do afterward." My hand tightened on the phone. "So the transfer to Jason might be void regardless of the SCRA violations?" "Potentially," Diana confirmed. "I need to do more research, but if I'm right, your brother never legally owned the property in the first place, which means he couldn't legally sell it to the developers. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 45 years old, and 7 years ago, I retired as a Marine Corps major after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. When I returned home to civilian life, my parents acted like my military career was just a phase I needed to outgrow. Now I run a successful security consulting firm in Austin that specializes in training corporate executives in crisis management. I never expected to set foot in my hometown of Oak Ridge again. But last month, My world turned upside down when I discovered my parents had secretly transferred my promised inheritance, my grandfather's lakeside cabin, to my younger brother. While I was deployed overseas, I wasted no time after Diana's revelation. If the property transfer to Jason had been invalid from the start, we needed to act immediately. I called Jason from the parking lot of the county records office, my heart racing with a mixture of vindication and anxiety. "Jason, I need you to meet me at the cabin. Now, bring any paperwork you have related to the property." My voice was clipped, authoritative, the same tone I'd used commanding troops in the field. "Becca, what's going on?" Concern threaded through his voice. "I think we've all been manipulated," I said. "Not just by Mom and Dad, but by the Whitmans. This isn't about vacation homes. It's about what's underneath the property." He agreed to meet me in 30 minutes. Before hanging up, he added, "Should I call Mom and Dad?" I hesitated. "No. Let's understand what we're dealing with first." When I arrived at the cabin, I walked the property with new eyes, noting the gentle slope of land behind the structure, the way the hill rose gradually toward the wooded area. Nothing about it screamed valuable mineral deposits to my untrained eye. But then again, the most precious resources often lay hidden. Jason's truck pulled up, kicking dust along the gravel driveway. He looked worried as he joined me on the porch, a folder tucked under his arm. "What's this about minerals?" he asked without preamble. I explained what I'd learned from Aunt Esther about our great-grandmother, the Native American heritage no one had bothered to tell us about, and the possibility of valuable deposits beneath the property. As I spoke, Jason's expression shifted from skepticism to stunned realization. "That would explain why Dad's been acting so strange," he said, opening the folder he'd brought. "Look at this contract. The standard real estate agreement is only the first few pages. But there's an addendum here about subsurface rights that I never noticed before." I scanned the document, legal language jumping out at me. The sale included explicit transfer of all mineral, oil, gas, and subsurface rights to Northern Lakes luxury properties, with no additional compensation beyond the purchase price of the cabin and land. "They're not paying market value for these rights," I said, anger building. "They're stealing them through misdirection, making everyone think this is just about vacation homes." "But why involve Dad at all?" Jason wondered. "If the Whitmans wanted the property, why not just approach us directly?" "Because Dad and Richard Whitman have history," I replied, pieces still falling into place. "And I think Dad owes him something. This whole deal stinks of old debts being called in." We sat on the porch steps, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn that sloped down to the lake. The water glittered invitingly, unchanged by the human dramas playing out along its shores. "What do we do now?" Jason asked finally. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with," I said. "My lawyer says the original transfer from our parents to you was likely invalid because of the matrilineal succession clause. If that's true, you never legally owned this property, which means the sale agreement with the developers is void." He ran a hand through his hair. "So the cabin could still be yours?" "Technically, it always was," I replied. "But before we do anything else, I want to know what's under this property and why the Whitmans want it so badly. And then I want to know why our parents were willing to go along with it." That evening, we put our plan in motion. Jason would confront our parents about the Whitman connection, using his position as the supposed current owner to demand answers about the mineral rights clause. Meanwhile, I contacted a geologist friend from my military days who now worked in the private sector, asking if he could recommend someone to perform a quick, discreet assessment of the property. "Might take a few days to get someone out there," he warned. "Unless you're near Chicago? I know a guy there who's excellent." By remarkable coincidence, that someone was available the very next day. Dr. Raj Patel arrived early in the morning, a compact man with a ready smile and specialized equipment packed into his SUV. Jason met us at the cabin, having taken the day off work to be part of the investigation. The permits filed by Whitman Resource Exploration show they were primarily interested in the hillside area, Dr. Patel explained, setting up his gear. They were looking for rare earth elements, particularly neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium. These are critical components in everything from wind turbines to electric vehicles to military applications. And they found something, I asked. Based on the limited data I could access, they found significant deposits. Not a world-class discovery, but valuable enough, especially given the current drive to develop domestic sources of these materials. He checked his instruments. Let's see if I can confirm their findings. While Dr. Patel conducted his survey, Jason shared what he'd learned from our parents. The confrontation had not gone well. Dad went ballistic, he reported, pacing the cabin's main room. Said I had no right to question his business associates or decisions made for the family's benefit. When I pushed about the mineral rights, he shut down completely, told me to be grateful for what I was getting from the sale and leave the past in the past. And Mom? She seemed genuinely confused at first, like she didn't know about any mineral rights. Then Dad snapped at her to leave the room. Jason frowned. Before she left, she whispered that I should talk to Uncle Robert. Said he knew the whole story about the Whitmans. Uncle Robert, my mother's brother who had moved to Arizona decades ago and rarely contacted the family. I'd always assumed there was some falling out I wasn't privy to, another piece of family history deemed unimportant to share with me. I called him immediately. After awkward greetings and catching up, I drove straight to the point. Uncle Robert, what can you tell me about the Whitmans and their connection to Dad? The silence on the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, he sighed heavily. I wondered if this would ever come up, he said. Your father owes Richard Whitman a debt that goes back to their senior year of high school. Richard took the blame for something your father did, something that could have meant criminal charges and would have certainly changed the course of his life. What did he do? I pressed. He accidentally injured Alexander Whitman during a fight. At a party, a fight over your mother, ironically. Alexander fell and hit his head badly, ended up hospitalized. Richard claimed he was the one who pushed Alexander, not your father. In exchange, your father promised Richard he'd make it right someday. And now Richard is calling in that debt by facilitating the sale of our property to his brother's company, I concluded. It's more complicated than that, Uncle Robert said carefully. The fight happened on the lakefront property, on what's now your cabin's land. The Whitmans had been trying to buy back that parcel for decades. Your great-grandmother Eleanor refused to sell it to them despite numerous offers, and your grandfather continued that tradition. It was all connecting now. The old land dispute Aunt Esther had mentioned, my father's debt to Richard, and the valuable minerals recently discovered beneath the property. Thank you, Uncle Robert, I said sincerely. This explains a lot. By afternoon, Dr. Patel had confirmed the presence of rare earth elements in concentrations that would make extraction commercially viable, particularly given the rising prices driven by clean energy demand. He estimated the mineral rights alone could be worth millions, far more than the $350,000 the Whitmans were paying for the entire property. They're swindling us, Jason said angrily after Dr. Patel departed, using old debts and family secrets to steal what could secure our family's future for generations. Not if I have anything to say about it, I replied, already dialing Diana. We're filing that injunction today. Events moved quickly after that. Diana filed for an emergency injunction based on the invalid property transfer from my parents to Jason, citing both the matrilineal succession clause and the SCRA violations. A judge granted the temporary injunction the next morning, halting any sale pending a full hearing. Alexander Whitman's reaction was swift and furious. He called my father, who then called Jason, demanding to know why the sale was being blocked. When Jason explained that I was challenging the property transfer, our father exploded. "She has no right," he shouted, loud enough that Jason had to hold the phone away from his ear. "This is family business, and she gave up her say when she abandoned her family for the military. But the legal momentum was on my side. Diana's research had confirmed that the matrilineal succession clause was valid and legally binding. My mother, as William Mitchell's daughter, should have inherited the property with the understanding that it would pass to me as the eldest female descendant. The transfer to Jason had violated not just my SCRA protections, but the original deed restrictions that had been in place for over 70 years. 3 days before the scheduled closing date, I called a family meeting at the cabin. My parents arrived looking tense and defensive, my father especially radiating anger as he stalked into the living room where Jason, Diana, and I waited. "What is this about?" he demanded. "Some kind of ambush?" "It's about truth," I said calmly, "about debts and secrets and what's really happening with this property." Over the next hour, I laid out everything I'd discovered: the mineral deposits, the old conflict between our family and the Whitmans, the matrilineal succession clause, and my father's debt to Richard. As I spoke, my mother's face grew increasingly pale, while my father's reddened with each revelation. "You had no right to dig into private family matters," he finally sputtered when I finished. "I had every right," I countered. "This property should have come to me upon Grandpa's death, according to both his explicit wishes and the legal restrictions on the deed. Instead, you transferred it to Jason while I was deployed, without my knowledge or consent, and now you're selling it to the Whitmans for a fraction of its true value because of a debt you've hidden for decades." My mother turned to my father, her expression stricken. "Thomas, is this true? About the minerals? About what the Whitmans are really buying?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "It's more complicated than she's making it sound." "Actually, it's quite straightforward," Diana interjected professionally. "The court has already granted our temporary injunction. Given the evidence we've presented, there's a very strong likelihood that the judge will void both the transfer to Jason and the pending sale at the full hearing next month." "You're ruining everything," my father said bitterly, glaring at me. "This sale was going to take care of Jason's family, pay off our mortgage, set things right with the Whitmans once and for all." "At my expense," I pointed out. "Using property? That was never yours to give away." Jason, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "Dad, you should have told me the truth. About all of it. The minerals, your debt to the Whitmans, Becca's legal right to the property. We could have found another solution together, as a family." My father's shoulders slumped, decades of secrets and manipulations finally catching up to him. My mother moved to stand beside me, her hand tentatively touching my arm. "I didn't know," she whispered. "About the minerals or the matrilineal clause. I thought we were helping Jason's family while respecting your independence. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Her simple acknowledgement, the first genuine apology I'd received from either parent in my adult life, cracked something open inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to consider that they might not have been acting purely out of dismissal of me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, addressing the room. "The sale to the Whitmans is off. I'm assuming full legal ownership of the property, as should have happened years ago. And then we're going to talk about how to move forward as a family, with all cards on the table." My father started to protest, but Jason cut him off. "It's over, Dad. The truth is out. It's time to accept it and figure out what comes next." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and tense family discussions. The Whitmans threatened litigation, but backed down when faced with the evidence of their attempted deception regarding the mineral rights. My father eventually admitted that Richard had been pressuring him for years to facilitate the sale of the property back to the Whitman family, using his old debt as leverage. "He kept saying it was my chance to make things right," my father explained during one difficult conversation. That Alexander had never fully recovered from that injury, that their family deserved to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Even though the land originally belonged to my great-grandmother's Native American family before the Whitmans claimed it, I countered. He had no answer for that. 3 months after my initial discovery of the property transfer, I stood on the cabin's deck, watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant oranges and golds. The court had officially recognized me as the rightful owner, invalidating both the transfer to Jason and the sale agreement with the Whitmans. I'd partnered with a mining company to develop the rare earth deposits in an environmentally sensitive way, structuring the deal to provide long-term income rather than a one-time payment. Most importantly, I'd established a family trust that would provide for Jason's children's education and Melissa's medical needs, while ensuring the cabin itself would pass to my niece, the next female descendant in our line, when the time came. The trust included funds to properly document our family's previously hidden Native American heritage and to establish educational scholarships for Native American women pursuing careers in geology or environmental science. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. Decades of misunderstanding and dismissal couldn't be erased by a single confrontation or apology. But we were talking now, really talking, about who we were and what we valued, about the ways we had hurt each other, and the possibility of healing. I kept my primary residence in Austin, but found myself spending more time at the cabin, renovating it gradually to honor both its history and its future. The matrilineal succession clause remained firmly in place, protecting the land for generations of Mitchell women to come. If you've ever had your inheritance taken from you or discovered, that family secrets run deeper than you ever imagined. I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes fighting for what's rightfully yours means uncovering truths that others have buried for decades. It's rarely easy, but it's always worth it to stand your ground. This cabin isn't just property to me. It's a connection to a heritage I never knew I had. To a great-grandmother who fought to reclaim what belonged to her family. To a grandfather who recognized my strength when others only saw what I wasn't. The stone talisman Aunt Esther gave me rarely leaves my neck now. I often find myself touching it while watching the sunrise over the lake, thinking about the generations of women who came before me and those who will come after. We are the keepers of this land, the protectors of its secrets, the ones who ensure its story continues. If my journey resonates with you, hit subscribe to hear more stories of standing up for yourself when others try to diminish your worth. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that what you thought was the whole story was just the surface of deeper family secrets? I'd love to hear from you. Remember, your inheritance isn't just about property or money. It's about honoring those who truly saw your value and fighting for the legacy they wanted you to have. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought across kitchen tables and in family living rooms, where the weapons are truth and determination rather than compromise and surrender. Subscribe to join me on this journey of reclaiming what's rightfully ours and building something new from the foundations of the past